Good evening. Welcome to New Horizons. Tonight, we have 5 new speakers nervously approaching the lectern. First up, we have Rob Jones, local businessman, and the slightly mouthy one who intros the speakers with climate change reduction. Rob, fancy saying that? Okay, a little bit of history. Born a long, long time ago and a long way away. I've always been a little bit nosy. Some say I should have been a copper. Curiosity killed the cat, so the saying goes, rather alarmingly. Well, I suppose it killed the odd one. But I think it's best to ignore this particular saying. I say curiosity is natural and available, brings forth questions and requires answers. So on with what my curiosity has found, condensed into this short talk at my first. Firstly, I'm not a scientist, and I originated none of the following work. I am reporting on the scientific findings of scientists and rat smellers, who I will mention, which have convinced me of a scam of enormous proportion. Anthropogenic global warming / climate change affects us all, targeting the belief system and the wallet, strangely enough. It's covered regularly in the media, a bit like a stuck record. I think that was a bit of a subjective comment, by the way. And i.e. the repetition of a concept over a long period, and most will accept it without further resistance. So that's the belief system quickly dealt with. Next, the wallet, which equals trading on CO2 emissions, the stuff that keeps on warming us up, allegedly. So what do I get for my money? And do I actually have to pay this extra amount, sometimes called a green tax? More brainwashing and no, 2 answers I like. Incidentally, Rob B pointed me to the DEFRA website, which indicates that this extra tax is voluntary, and this will be followed up. I shall briefly cover cap and trade, which is the emissions trading systems. Trading to me indicates the opportunities around money. This is relatively new, so the foot in the door approach is used, as always, to lever the way in. Gradualism again, like our beloved value-added tax. So, cap and trade sets a limit on carbon emissions, initially just by a larger industry. Companies purchase emissions allowances from the market, which can be traded with other companies, and if not used up after a year. Sorry, with other companies if not used up after a year. However, if emissions come in at over and above your cap, the company is heavily fined. This is CO2 control. The EU, who don't keep accurate financial records, impose this control on the assumption that it can cool us down with what can be described as sanctions on its member states, therefore the people. Many changes in the legislation around CO2 pricing and trading have already started, called reform. This is causing more companies and industry to fall under the cap and trade requirements. Covered, or should I say controlled, are power and heat, oil refineries, steel industry, cement, lime, glass, paper, organic chemicals, acids, i.e. most of the infrastructure. All additional cost to be passed to the end user. Another carbon emitter. You, madam. Now, CO2 emissions from industry have apparently, in line with legislation, dropped, thus creating surplus trading allowances, caused mostly by the economic downturn, actually, which has produced less of everything. Excellent, we're saved. No! Evidently, this is bad, as it upsets the orderly function of the carbon market. This sounds like we need more economists. or the persuasive, influential insider dealer in the form of Al Gore, with his politically one-sided and inconvenient truth film, this according to a High Court judge. Al Gore has made untold millions of dollars by investing in green companies ahead of major government grant injections. He also lives, according to him, a carbon-neutral lifestyle, which is rather strange for a carbon-based unit. He buys carbon credits for a company he's part owner of. He's also famous, a better public speaker than me, and has a huge fan base, unlike me. Here is an overview of what is published as current consensus and which side education and media is weighted toward. Atmosphere allows solar radiant energy in, which is the warm stuff, which warms the surfaces of the Earth. Then it is re-radiated back, but trapped by CO2 gas, of which we contribute greatly through industrialization and breathing, causing a temperature build-up that melts polar ice, thus presenting a threat to the coastal areas through rising sea levels and affecting complex oceanic currents. This trapping and build-up of heat is called greenhouse forcing, or the greenhouse effect. Now, one counter to this is a repeatable experiment from a Professor Robert W. Wood in 1909, which I shall refer to later. There is a group of people, actual numbers unknown, who have existed since 1988, called the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, probably quite well paid. They called day one of its climate change comparison chart sometime in 1976. The IPCC used computer models to demonstrate how much the Earth is warming due to our CO2 emissions, reinforced by the inconvenient truth, documentary, maybe, depending upon the computer's programmer's agenda. Now comes a however, and this one goes something like this. The correctly interpreted Vostok ice core data shows temperature rises first, followed by rises in CO2 second. Surely this can't be correct. Someone must have spotted this and said something. This is an error. A temperature gate. 800 years ago, there was a temperature rise, and CO2 levels are just starting to elevate after this event. However, Earth's temperature has been almost unchanged in 16 years, and certainly within the levels of normality. An interesting chart showing temperature and CO2 variances made by the Hadley Research Unit for the Land and the Sea and NASA Microwave Sounding Unit show that from 1998 till 2010, a slowly rising CO2 level, which is 366 parts per million up to 389 parts per million, but shows a temperature drop in the lower troposphere of 0.37 degrees C over 12 years. And the measurement was taken in 2010. This from John O'Sullivan from Climate Realists. NASA satellites are unable to confirm that our atmosphere traps heat via CO2. Heat escapes to space, whose temperature is strangely enough neutral, e.g. not measurably hot or cold. Anthropogenic global warming proponents used, amongst other things, the Stefan Boltzmann law to argue atmospheric heating. However, this law applies to solid surfaces, not gases. Astrophysicist Joseph Postma uncovered that the greenhouse gas effect is calculated, computer model, without reference to nighttime, which is cooler and probably wrong. Postma also points to first global temperatures, again being almost flatlined for over 16 years, and the Vostok ice core data, which indicates that over 150,000 years, rises in atmospheric CO2 follow and not precede rises in temperature. It kind of indicates That temperature rises, think the large bright thing that rises in the east, drives CO2 levels, probably along with volcano contributions. Shove a tax on that. Our sun warms all the planets, and the range depends upon solar flares and sunspots. This from Hans Schroeder, retired analytical chemist, and whose website is, all the W's, ilovemycarbondioxide.com. Maybe so should you. Don't know. This is my inspiration for doing this talk, as I attempted to contact Mr. Schroeder without success to get him to present here. So decided that this information, which tonight only covers a small portion of the subject, was too important to remain unheard. I really recommend this site. It cuts through the hype and hysteria with logic, reasoning and science. Earth's normal temperature must be deduced from a large time span. So let's take a trip back 1,000 years and the medieval warm period. Temperatures rise 2 degrees C above mean, and Greenland is verdant pasture, the clue's in the name, for 300 years. Then a 2-degree drop below mean, and we're skating on the Thames. Not much industrialisation about, or people in comparison, more forests though. Move back 5,000 years, we encounter 4 warm periods in total: the Minoan, the Roman, the medieval, as mentioned, and the late 20th century. The latter being the coolest of the 4. According to Groots, using oxygen isotope comparison records from Greenland ice cores. Brief look at gases which comprise our atmosphere: 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 5% water vapour, 0.9% argon. Have I forgot anything? CO2. This comes in along with the trace gases, which combined make up less than 1%. That's the taxable bit. This comes in about 0.0386% in 2009. And of the trace gases, our contribution in CO2 is 0.12% of that figure. Now, these emissions are reported in green papers and the media repeatedly, but always described in millions of tonnes, making the guilt easier to take on board, and also the extra tax. How presumptuous to claim that we can buy temperature control by concentrating on one trace gas. I smell a rat. When questioned as to the origin of the information that produced that famous hockey stick graph, champion graph drawer Michael Mann said he forgot. Further investigation provided a clue with the National Climatic Data Centre, who in 1990 excuse me, shut down 3/4 of the climate measuring stations worldwide at higher altitudes, latitudes and in rural positions. These particular stations tended to be on cooler sites, thus loading the temperature data in favour of warmer averages. This data was then used to initialise climate models. Figures: 1960 to 1980, there were 6,000 stations. Today, now down to 1,500. Seems less equals more. We are politically warming up. And that rat is really stinking now. Another organisation taking the long-term view, this time 650,000 years, is the American Geophysical Union, which points to an abrupt cooling 5,200 years ago, preceded by a warmish period of a few decades, coinciding with low sun activity and confirmed by tree ring analysis. Lonnie Thompson, a professor of geological sciences working at the Byrd Polar Research Centre, specialising in ice core analysis, states that 5,200 years was a time of low sun activity similar to today. He does an expose of ice cores using carbon-14 dating. Not, of course, on the ice itself, but on the organic contents. Again, indicates the driver for climatic change is the sun and volcanoes. Volcanic ash forms extremely dense clouds. These cool the Earth. Professor David Bellamy, in 2010, finds Arctic gaining ice weight since 2007. Alarmist statements like the Northwest Passage is now navigable as ice recedes doesn't take into account that some ships have successfully navigated this since 1850. However, modern icebreaker design ships have extremely tough keels and are very powerful, enabling confident passage. Polar bears dying as ice recedes, not strictly true. Their number has been increasing for 30 years. The recorded sea level rises were due to the end of the last ice age and rose from 1850 until 2006, stationary thereafter. He also states that out of 2,500 scientists who allegedly agreed on CO2 being the causative factor in climate change, only 7 were independent, and 2 of these actually disagreed with anthropogenic global warming. 31,000 scientists signed a petition saying CO2 was not causative. The current climate is well within the limits of supporting life and has been so for several billion years. CO2 is odourless, colourless, non-toxic to nature. Ask a plant. Any CO2 rise will increase plant growth equals food. Yummy. What Professor David Bellamy has found is that any contrarian view within science of so-called consensus is violently attacked and vilified. Research, grants and jobs disappear. Why so aggressive a stance? Emotions surely play no part in science, just honest discussion and research on all subjects. Maybe not. Jane Hurt, physical oceanographer, states in 2009 that Arctic ice lost was due to wind. She also states the complexity of climatic variances, still little understood, but suffice to say that the ice had not melted but had been blown to the North Atlantic. Late 2012, Antarctic sea ice, as surveyed by the National Snow and Ice Data Centre, reached a 33-year high. Professor Philip Scott, climate change is governed by hundreds of factors. The sun, volcanoes, tilt of the earth, water vapour, methane, clouds, albedo, I'll cover that in a minute, oceanic cycles, plate tectonics, dust, atmosphere movement, cosmic rays, forests, land use, etc. Professor Nassif Nala repeated Robert W. Wood's experiment from 1909 on the theory of the greenhouse. That's his experiment. Proving that the increase in temperature inside a greenhouse was not due to trapped infrared radiation, but was due to the blockage of heat transfer between the inside of the greenhouse and the open air. No gas traps heat. No gas traps heat. They tend to cool whatever they contact through air movement. Gas captured in pockets, like in clothing or double glazed units, behave differently as they are enclosed and still. IPCC data 2011 confirms that nature absorbs 98.5% of all CO2 emissions, both natural and our contribution, which comes in around 2.9% annually, or just over 10 parts per million. interesting is that CO2 levels, as CO2 levels increase, as previously mentioned, so does plant growth. Nature's carbon capture, free of charge. Something sinister this way comes, in the form of chemtrails. These are emitted by aircraft all over the world. Initially with the appearance of vapour trails, these don't disappear but spread to give us a grey out. They probably have a large ingredient list, and most certainly contain aluminium and barium, two metals. All the W's. Checktheevidence.com gives good coverage on chemtrails, or geoengineering, as it has been called, when whoever is involved in this thinks no one is listening. The coverage is not as comprehensive as the trails themselves, though. Scenario. The reflective qualities of these metallised clouds reflect the sun's rays off their upper surfaces, so they fail to reach the Earth's surface. This encourages cooling. At certain temperatures, snow falls, which is highly reflective, thus reflecting most of the rays that make it past the cloud barrier, cooling us down even more. More snow falls, creating a larger reflective surface known as the albedo effect, opposite to the Al Gore effect. Worst case, a hockey stick turns up again, but this time going down rapidly. The steep plunge in temperature might take but a few months. Freezing to death, crops, animals, and us. Infrastructure would grind to a halt. Can't have that now, can we? You can't buy your way out of it neither. The answer, to answer the question of the reflectivity of the cloud's underside, yes, of course it does. But it's much, much less to reflect as compared to the sun's emissions. The albedo effect was actually taken from the work of Dr. Noor van Andel, put into my words. Last bit, politics. US government bureaucrats, now and forever, will have a say in how Americans use their land, energy, water, and property. This Obama order has bypassed Congress. There's a good dictator then. Obama, or at least his handlers, casually handed a $7.4 trillion carbon trading bill, indirectly through cap and trade, to the American citizens, already financially struggling. This sounds like debt servitude to me. Financial slavery. Slavery is banned everywhere. No. It still exists, but it's illegal. A lot. Suppose we can build a few more wind farms. Inefficient and costly, given the narrow wind speed range they will operate at. Large initial cost and maintenance against output. These are preferred, for us of course, over tidal. Not in my backyard. Green politics again. I was told by a gentleman who professed knowledge at an anti-frack camp meeting that the approximate level of 400 parts per million of CO2 must be reduced within 3 years to stop widespread coastal flooding due to ice cap melt. It must be done by aggressive CO2 reducing schemes and capture. I stated that this was an alarmist statement and asked for anything. I asked for evidence, anything. Oh dear. I was immediately shut down by others and cold-shouldered by 100% of a tent full of strangely educated tree huggers and ageing lefty hippies stroke communists. Was that a bit subjective? Not sure, really. Plants, however, stop growing at levels below 200 parts per million, so be careful, chaps, we could starve to death. Let's fatten them up, that's what I say. Now this one touches on the biggest subject that will affect everyone on Earth. Everybody. This is the UN Agenda 21. The The CO2 reductionist policies could see us as pollution. The CO2 reductionist policies could see us as pollution. It appears to have no boundaries, growing like a plant in a CO2-rich atmosphere, far-reaching, precursor to total surveillance and control, for the greater good, of course, a new religion, the panopticon. Solutions, as always, motivation and education of large numbers of people. No courses out there, I don't think. Do it yourself. 2 carbon footprints, so what? You fill in the blank. Thank you.